Balaclava on that very same bugle. The 25th of October, 1854.
The Light Brigade charged the Russian guns. 30 minutes later, 1 in 6 of them were dead. This is the story of the Crimean War, told in the words and pictures of those who were there. In October 1854, a British fleet was anchored in the narrow bay at Balaclava harbour on Russia's southern shores. Britain, France and Turkey had invaded the Crimea, intent on destroying the Tsar's Black Sea stronghold at Sebastopol. On October the 25th, a Russian army attacked the British camp just outside Balaclava, trying to push them back into the sea. Early that morning, they forced the Turks to abandon their artillery positions defending the town. From a hilltop just outside Balaclava, the British commander, Lord Raglan, could see the Russians across the valley, dragging away the captured guns. Now, all that could stop them was the cream of the British cavalry, the Light Brigade. The Light Brigade down in the valley couldn't see the Turkish guns behind this hill. The only guns they could see belonged to the main Russian army at the far end of the valley. Cavalryman Albert Mitchell described what happened next.
We could see the enemy had placed a number of guns across the lower part of the valley, nearly a mile and a half from us. At the same time, a field battery ascended a hill on our left front where it was placed in a position facing us. Things were in this state when Captain Nolan came galloping down and handed a paper to Lord Lucan.
Lord Raglan wishes the cavalry to advance rapidly to the front. Follow the enemy and try to prevent the enemy carrying away the guns. Troop horse artillery may accompany. French cavalry is on your left. Immediate.
Cavalry Commander Lord Lucan asked for clarification. Nolan replied,
Lord Raglan's orders are that the cavalry should attack immediately.
Attack, sir? Attack what? What guns, sir?
There, my lord, is your enemy. There are your guns.
The brigade was ordered to advance down the valley towards the main Russian position. Raglan's message had been misunderstood. A 34-year-old Irishman, William Howard Russell, the world's first war correspondent, was watching from the hillside.
They swept proudly past, glittering in the morning sun in all the pride and splendor of war. We could scarcely believe the evidence of our senses. Surely that handful of men are not going to charge an army in position. Alas, it was but too true.
Suddenly, Captain Nolan rode up to Light Brigade Commander Lord Cardigan. Was he trying to redirect the charge? Before he could speak, a shell splinter pierced his chest. Russian guns on both sides of the valley, as well as in the battery ahead, were now pouring a tremendous cannonade on the advancing cavalry. The Allied commanders on the heights could finally see the charge for what it was. Spectacular, but suicidal.
They saw perfectly that at the end of the valley there were Russian guns waiting for them. And they thought that it was completely against all the rules of the military art to charge guns this way. So that's why the General Bosquet had this famous words, c'est magnifique, mais ce n'est pas la guerre, c'est de la folie.
Madness or not, the Light Brigade was now galloping towards the guns.
As we drew near, the guns in our front supplied us liberally with grape and canister, which brought down men and horses in heaps. Up to this time I was going on all right, but missed my left-hand man from my side, and thinking it might soon be my turn, offered up a short prayer. Oh Lord, protect me, and watch over my poor mother. Private Albert Mitchell.
Galloping behind Mitchell was Butcher Jack Fahey, still wearing his butcher's apron and wielding his axe.
Nearer and nearer we came to the dreadful battery, which kept vomiting death on us like a volcano, till I seemed to feel on me cheek the hot air from the cannon's mouth. At last we were on it. Half a dozen of us leapt in among the guns at once, and I, with one blow of my axe, brained a Russian gunner just as he was clapping the linstock to the touch-hole of his piece.
Having smashed through the line of guns at the end of the valley, the Light Brigade were confronted by massed ranks of Russian cavalry. They charged again, until overwhelming numbers forced them to retreat. Lord Cardigan's dashing second-in-command, Lord George Paget, who had kept a cheroot clenched between his teeth throughout the charge, led his men back through the carnage. The Light Brigade now had to run the gauntlet of Russian cannons again, but relief was at hand. A French cavalry regiment, the Chasseurs d'Afrique, had been waiting for an opportunity to help the retreating Light Brigade. They charged the Russian battery on the hillside, forcing the gunners to withdraw. The brigade struggled back down the valley.
Wounded men and dismounted troopers flying towards us told the sad tale. Demigods could not have done what we had failed to do. At 35 minutes past 11, not a British soldier, except the dead and dying, was left in front of these bloody Muscovite guns. William Howard Russell.
"362 horses were killed. Of some 630 men who charged, 110 were killed in action. "196 were wounded, and 57 taken prisoner. For the rest of the war, the Light Brigade were to be little more than spectators. But the Russians never forgot the British courage at Balaclava, nor risked another encounter with their cavalry. Reports of the battle sent home concentrated on the valor of the Light Brigade. The stupidity of sending cavalry to charge cannons was forgotten. Poets, painters, and the press all rushed to turn disaster into glory. Within weeks, the poet laureate Alfred Lord Tennyson had immortalized the Light Brigade in verse. Tennyson recorded his poem for posterity in 1890.
All in the valley of death rode the 600. Forward the Light Brigade. Was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew someone had blundered. Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600.
While Tennyson was writing his poem at home, a Scottish painter and illustrator, William Simpson, had arrived in the Crimea.
The Battle of Balaclava had taken place before I arrived, but it was necessary for me to give pictures. I could easily make sketches on the ground, but I had to trust to those on the spot for a description of the events.
The most important eyewitness Simpson consulted was the Light Brigade commander, Lord Cardigan. but it took several visits to his yacht in Balaclava harbour before the artist's third sketch met with Cardigan's approval.
I went on board a third time and was rewarded with the warmest praise and was able to send it home with the expression of Lord Cardigan's highest admiration. The real truth was that in the last sketch I had taken greater care than in the first two to make his lordship conspicuous in the front of the brigade.
Simpson's vetted watercolours received the same privileged treatment as Raglan's own dispatches from the front and were sent home on the first available ship. Though there was no censorship, William Howard Russell's reports and ordinary soldiers' letters were often delayed in Balaclava to ensure that the official version of events got home first. 2 weeks after Balaclava, the Russians camped on the heights at Inkerman, prepared for another assault on the Allies across the valley. At 4 o'clock in the morning on November the 5th, Pyotr Alabin made a note in his diary.
The rain has made thick mud, which makes our ascent more difficult. The regiments are beginning to move. Our horses are being saddled. We put the samovar on the embers of the fire and drank our fill of tea, perhaps for the last time. The regiments are standing at attention. It's time to close my diary. And will I ever open these precious pages again?
The Russian plan was to steal across the river at dawn and advance up the hill to attack the British batteries, while a continuous barrage from inside Sebastopol distracted the French. Once again, the British were unprepared. Russian guns were devastating the British camp before the Allies even knew what was happening.
The men of the division had just returned off trench duty, and some were preparing breakfast. Others enjoying a short sleep, but were soon aroused by a rough salute from the enemy's guns ploughing up the ground and tearing the tents down about their ears, and the poor fellows, half of them naked under the blankets. Sergeant Richard Barnum, 2nd Division.
The 2nd Division's commander was General Pennyfather, whose rule of thumb in battle was, whenever you see a head, hit it. This was good advice for a battle of skirmishes, fought in thick fog and on ground covered with dense scrub. 28-year-old Captain Henry Clifford was with a group which hurried to Pennyfather's support. In a letter home he wrote,
"Dear friends and relations, at daybreak, fire of musketry was heard to our extreme right. On reaching the ground of the 2nd Division, it was evident from the roll of musketry the enemy was in great force and had driven back our pickets. Most unfortunately, the weather was very foggy, and we could only be guided by the sound of the firing."
Suddenly, Clifford saw a large group of Russians emerging from the fog, only 15 yards away.
It was a moment or two before I could make General Buller believe they were Russians. "In God's name," I said, "fix bayonets and charge." He gave the order, and in another moment we were hand to hand with them. I drew my sword and cut off one man's arm who was in the act of bayoneting me, and a second, seeing it, turned round and was in the act of running out of my way when I hit him over the back of the neck and laid him dead at my feet. I saw one poor fellow's head carried away by a shot, and some 10 or a dozen blown into the air by a shell.
Elsewhere on the battlefield, things were going better for the Russians. Under cover of their artillery, Captain Hadozievich and his men swiftly overran the British sandbag battery.
"Forward with the bayonet," shouted I. I scrambled up the battery and saw by their red coats that we were engaged with the English Guards. They retired about 400 yards and opened a fire of rifles upon us.
20-year-old Sergeant Timothy Gowing of the 7th Fusiliers saw the Russian assault from the sharp end of their bayonets.
Our loss was heavy. 3 generals fell and every mounted officer. But our men fought to the bitter end and stood triumphantly on the rocky ridge cheering for victory. The Guards, all must admit, set a glorious example, for if they had to die, they acted upon the old 57th motto, "Let us die hard."
Early that morning, when General Bosquet first heard firing, he had offered French assistance to General Cathcart and Lord George Brown. This had been politely refused. With Cathcart now dead and Brown badly wounded, Bosquet decided to act anyway.
Sweating, our uniforms sticking to our backs with the rain, we chased each other through the bush, and vlam! Someone got hit with the butt of a rifle, and vlam! Someone got a bayonet in the stomach, and someone got a bullet between the eyes. They just kept coming, and